Hello and welcome to Matt Chambers Connects, a podcast hosted by Matt Chambers. This is the podcast that transcends boundaries, empowers cross-cultural connections, and fosters a more connected world. I'm your host, Matt Chambers, and I invite you to join us on this quest to expand our understanding and build bridges between my two favorite places on the planet, Latin America and the United States. I've been traveling, living, and doing business in Latin America for nearly 2 decades.
Hey, what's up with you? What's new? I think it's been, I don't know when the last time I was that I talked to you within the last couple of weeks. Prior to that, it's been a couple of years, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Just life is getting on.
It's certainly flying by, right?
Yeah. We're both getting older. It seems like, for me, when we lived in Atlanta, for example, that still seems like yesterday, but it wasn't. It was more than a decade ago.
Way more than a decade. It was like 14, 15 years ago, I think.
It was 11. I moved to Europe in 2013.
Yeah. Okay. So 11 years ago. Wow. But I mean, we've known each other, many years before that, right? Because we met in Champaign.
Yeah. When I was like 19.
You were 19 when we met.
A long time. Yeah. A long time ago. I mean, 20 years or so ago, you would come for a party.
I came for Tina's birthday party. Yeah. I drove all the way down from Minneapolis to Champaign, which was like a ridiculous drive. Jesus. She owes me for that. That was a hell of a drive.
Were you working in Minneapolis at the time?
Yeah, no, I was living in Minneapolis. I had just started in the furniture business, and I ended up living in Minneapolis about 2.5 years. And then we expanded out into Wisconsin and Illinois. But at that time, I don't even think we had expanded yet. I think I was just primarily working the Dakotas and Minneapolis. And I had just maybe gotten back from Venezuela, had recently met Tina maybe within the last year or something. She had just turned 30 or something. Yeah. And I went down, it was her 25th birthday, I think. Something like that. I think she's maybe 2 years older than me or something. And so I think it was like her 20.
A long time ago.
That's 18 years.
Then you moved to Atlanta and you were living literally across the street from me. Well, from where I was working. I don't know if you knew this, but do you remember that Piedmont Peachtree intersection, that really busy intersection? You go over the bridge. Yeah. So when I first moved to Atlanta, there were these apartment buildings sort of like behind that Chipotle. I don't know if it's still there a decade on, but there were these apartment buildings and I first lived there. Then I moved, and when I moved, at the same time that I moved, I took a new job. And the job that I was working at had an office in Midtown. And I was very happy, okay, I'm done with this intersection. I'm done with Buckhead for a while. And then that office, within 2 or 3 months of me going to their Midtown office, they announced that they were moving office space to Buckhead, literally to the building right next to where I used to live. So I feel as though the entire time that I was living in Atlanta was either working or living at that intersection, and you were living right across the street.
Yeah, I lived at the Buckhead Grand, right? That was right there. And you guys came over a couple times, if I'm not mistaken, several times.
Yeah, it was a nice apartment that you had.
The condo was incredible. That was some of the best year. I think maybe for sure in my adult life, those are definitely the 10 of the most enjoyable years I've had since leaving college 20 years ago. I would say those 10 years they were incredible. I had a good time in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a great condo too, right? That building, the neighbors were incredible. I miss those guys. I really do miss those people a lot. My years in South America have been incredible too, but it's just been a different kind of incredible.
Different thing. It's definitely a difference to move overseas and to not have this sort of same fluidity maybe that you do in the States. And I think for me, that's been the biggest difference. Although you couldn't always tell it, when you first move, it's all wonderful and exciting. Yeah. There's this small piece of understanding that's sort of innate that you maybe don't realize that you have even, that you lose. And I'm not saying it's a negative loss. It can be for a better loss, but it's certainly been a change, I think. Do you have the same
I don't know if I
feeling?
understand. I think I understand what you're saying, but explain it. Explain what you mean by that. I mean, I would say what I think you mean by that is that you have this innate ability to adapt and to meet people even without being completely in your element and fluent in a language in the beginning. Is that where you're going with that?
No, I mean, just to get around life. That's for me the biggest difference, I think, from living overseas. To say that you're going to go to the
Mm-hmm.
DMV, right? You know how it works in the States.
Yeah.
You know how to make people, maybe you don't have exactly the right form, but you know how to make it happen, right? You know what you need. You know what you need to say. And to do it overseas, it gets done eventually. It might take a few tries, depending on the country. But you aren't always, there's not inside of, I don't feel inside of me always that there's this ability, at least at the very beginning, that there wasn't this ability to say, how exactly does it work to get this to happen? But it may be quite different for you being in Colombia, different culture, maybe more laid back, for example, than it is for me being in
for
Europe.
sure. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. The Europeans, the Americans are way more uptight than anyone's going to be in Latin America. But that's not always so negative, right? Things actually get done for the most part in the States and Europe. In South America, it seems like everything always finds a way to work out. Like you think most things aren't going to work out, and it's months later for something that's super simple, and you think it's never going to work out, and then somehow it just happens. And then there are like these crazy ways that I just feel like in the first world you have these uniform set of rules and laws, and for the most part people are forced to follow them and do follow them. At least lawyers and people like that actually follow the laws because they have to and they want to. South America's not really like that. Somebody tells you that they're a lawyer, it doesn't mean it. They're a lawyer, of course. They got this 2-year law degree. There's a real high chance that there's definitely no uniform set of laws. And if there is, no one knows what those laws really are, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. And I don't think they care if they really follow them anyway. It's just a big hodgepodge of weird stuff living in South America. And like, I think that, I was having this conversation with a buddy the other day in a different way, but I think that most of us end up staying in South America or wanting to spend more time here because it's all this free and easy entertainment. I mean, there's just weird stuff going on. You're like going down the street and you're on a main road and there's 3 people on the same scooter. And actually, like, no one should be on the scooter on that actual road. But here there's 3 people. There's not only someone on a scooter going through riding down a 4-lane highway, but there's 3 people on the damn scooter. So there's stuff like that just keeps you entertained 24/7 in South America. So, again, I think in large part, that's why a lot of us end up staying for so long and we can't get out of here because you go back to the States and Europe and you're just bored out of your mind because everyone's vanilla and everyone's following all the rules. And it's kind of cool to live in a place where not everyone follows the rules and no one cares if they do or not, right? Most of the time in South America, depending on where you are, I would say if you need to get something done, they always find a way to figure out how to get it done for you. It may not always be most of the time. You're better off not caring how it gets done. Just telling someone that you think knows how to get it done, that you need it done, and all of a sudden it comes back done, and you don't care how it got done because if you care, then you're just going to get wrapped up in a big hodgepodge of stuff that it's just.
Yes. See, here in the Netherlands, where I am, they want to always say, no, that's not possible. I feel like that's a favorite phrase. No, it's not possible. No, we can't do it. No, it doesn't work that way.
I've always found the Dutch to be a little bit like that. I have several friends that are Dutch and they just don't have that like entrepreneurial mind in any way that says like, let's just bend this rule a little bit. It's like, no, that's not how it works. Like I have a buddy that every time you tell him about a business deal or an investment, he'll be like, well, maybe you should just go do that because that guy already has his business established. Maybe you shouldn't try that new thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or you'll tell him, I'm going to start this podcast. He's like, well, there's like 2 million podcasts out there. You're like, to me, that's kind of how the Dutch have been in every interaction I've ever had.
Exactly. Most of them, well, I don't want to generalize because this is not at all to
no, for
rag
sure,
on
for
the
sure.
Dutch.
No, for sure.
In any point whatsoever, I've made my home here, so that's okay.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, there's certainly not that much of an entrepreneurial spirit, and the culture doesn't support it. They tax entrepreneurs much more They don't have the systems in place really to support it in a lot of ways. I think it's getting better. I think in the western part of the country that there's certainly more promotion of trying to do your own thing, of trying to start a business, especially if it's in the technology or sort of this eco green space. There's a lot of support for that. But it depends on where in the country you are as well, I think. And that probably holds true for any country, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so. I've had some really great friends from the Netherlands and frankly from Europe all over. I just noticed that again, I wasn't trying to be negative. I just think that is kind of the MO or what I've noticed from the people that I've met is but the thing about them is, man, they get their work done, they save their money, and they probably freaking retire at 40 years old. I don't know how it works there, but maybe that's not true. I could be completely off with that, but
yeah.
Anyway, so let's do this. Let's go back through your life. I mean, I know we met a long time ago, and I think it's probably important for people to kind of see where you've come from and where you are now. So why don't you take me back through some highlights of your childhood up until when I met you in college?
My childhood. I know that your focus is on traveling and doing this. And I think that my childhood was very instrumental in giving me this travel bug as well, if you want to call it that. Both of my parents were teachers, and they had 3 months off, right, for the summer holidays. And so every single summer from my very first summer, we traveled around to somewhere. Primarily in North America, but when I was maybe 10, 11, with my father, I started traveling in South America, Central America as well. I mean, we spent a summer in Chile and Argentina. We spent a summer in Guatemala and Belize, Mexico. And one of the really cool things about my parents, and maybe this was because they were educators, but every year there was almost a theme to it. So, for example, one year I was really into Little House on the Prairie. I don't know if you know what that is. I think it's more marketed.
No, absolutely. I grew up in small town West Virginia. My mom used to turn that on all the time for whatever reason. I loved it, but go ahead.
Yeah, these books, right? And maybe there was a television show as well. Out in Missouri and I don't know, Kansas, Oklahoma. I'm sure I knew better where they were when I was 7, 8 years old, but I was absolutely obsessed with it. So with my parents, we went and spent the summer sort of going to all of those places because it was a real book series, right? It was sort of autobiographical in a sense that you could go around, you could say, this is where their house was. Look at the wagon ruts in the ground as they had the wagon trains out west. Another summer, I was absolutely obsessed with American Indians. So we went and stayed in these sort of sky pueblos in the Southwest. We visited various sites and traveled all around and sort of had that educational aspect to it. And so I really appreciated that about my parents. And that continued really until I was in high school. And then, you get other interests, boyfriends, sports,
damn
whatever.
Boyfriends.
And in recent years, my father, he's such a cool guy. In recent years, I say recent, but more since I moved to Europe, he retired and he bought a motorcycle. I
remember this, but I definitely remember this. Go ahead. I want people to hear that.
So he bought a motorcycle. He named it Odysseus. Was very excited about it, and he circumnavigated the world with his motorcycle at age 72, maybe. It took him years to do it, and I joined him for a lot of those trips. I was already in Europe at that time, so I did parts of it with him. Did some in Romania with him. Went up to Scandinavia with him. I joined him in Australia. I joined him in China, was most recent. And now he's telling me, so his motorcycle adventure is ended. Now he's 80. And he has decided that he wants to buy a sailboat. Not that he has any sailing experience, really, but he wants to buy a sailboat, take it from Kentucky Lakes, and somehow there's some trajectory that you can do down, I don't know, the Missouri or the Mississippi, down the bottom of the state around Florida, and then up the intercoastal waterway to, I don't know, New York, over through the Great Lakes and back down. So this is the environment that I grew up in. And I think that it was a really blessed
Absolutely.
environment
I agree.
On reflection to sort of give you more of a freedom and not a scaredness. I think what holds a lot of people back is this feeling of uncertainty, right? Of, oh, I don't think I could do that.
I don't speak the language. That's the first one. They speak English over there, you know?
That doesn't matter. The language should be no one's worry whatsoever. Yeah, it should never be anyone's worry. And but it is. I think it's a fear of maybe not being used to it, not having been even outside of the country, or maybe people have been to the Caribbean, for example, but not doing things on your own. And I think that was for me very instrumental. You know, and then I went off to college, went off to law school, met you.
Meeting me was the highlight of all
Atlanta. It was a highlight of all of you in my life. Exactly.
Yeah, no,
always coming up with crazy things to do.
It's so awesome that, you know, you got that as a kid, and I certainly got that on a much smaller level, you know, But I think, like, you just go one place. It doesn't matter where it is. It's just get in the car and start, or get in the boat and start, or get in the plane and start, whatever it is. Start and go somewhere, and then one thing leads to another, and it just becomes a drug. It's an addiction.
Yeah. And were you traveling by yourself? I feel like in my 20s and in my 30s, I always traveled by myself as well. And I meet a lot of people who say that they've never gone to a restaurant by themselves, for example. And I say, I had this conversation with a girlfriend of mine. I remember it quite clearly a few years ago. And it was during COVID, I think. And she wanted to go somewhere in France. And I said, just go do it. Go book an Airbnb, go for 2 weeks, you know, bring a book or whatever. You'll have fun. And she said, but I've never even eaten at a restaurant by myself. How can I do that? And maybe it's that fear of being alone, or maybe that fear of people are going to look at you, you're going to be strange, that holds people back as well. But did you go do those things by yourself?
I had no choice. I don't know exactly where it started, but for sure, when I was in the furniture business, my first 2.5 years was in Minneapolis, and my job was to travel all of Minnesota and North Dakota and South Dakota and visit these furniture operations, because I was selling B2B. So, you know, I'd be in Fargo, North Dakota. God forbid, what a place. I mean, you know, especially in January, you're like ice skating to try to get up there. But you get to freaking Fargo, and what are you going to do, right? You're in a hotel for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. I mean, you're obviously not, at that time, Airbnb wasn't a thing. It was hotels. You know, I was getting on Priceline.
Right.
Getting a $95 hotel room for $46, and that's what I did. And so obviously you can't cook. The hotel food is kind of crappy most of the time, so you're going to go out and eat, right? And I don't know if I know that gave me more confidence, because I had to do it 3 times a day, 4 days a week for, you know, 10 years or 11 years that I was in the furniture business, 'cause always on the road. I don't know if I've always had this innate confidence to where I really didn't care much about what anyone else thought. So I know that fear of walking in and the bartender or the people there thinking I was a weirdo didn't matter to me. What I'm not sure about is if I ever had that fear. I know I do remember having that fear of going and eating alone at some point. I can't pinpoint where, but I do remember having that. But at this point, I would say 90% of my meals in my life have been alone, because all I do is travel. You know? And I think you would agree with this. But if you waited around on your, you know, think back when you were a kid, and even now, if you picked out your top 3 or 4 girlfriends, and you waited around on all 3 or 4 of them before you went on a trip, how many trips would you have gone on?
It would have never
left Illinois ever. You'd be in Champaign still, or wherever you grew up, right?
Would have never happened.
And so I figured that out. I tried, you know, in high school and college. I know that I started off going to like Virginia Tech to meet, you know, you'd have these friends that were a couple years older, and I'd go to like Virginia Tech to meet this one for the weekend because they were there. And the next one was at WVU, West Virginia. And the next one's at Marshall University. So you'd go and get these little weekend trips, which looking back on it are simple and not a big deal. And I wouldn't even do them now. But those are gateways. I think that's what your dad did for you. He gave you the gateway drug. And now it's just, if somebody called you right now and said, hey, you have to be in Shanghai tomorrow, you'd be on a plane. Like, who cares? Let's do it.
Yeah.
Right.
No
Yeah.
problem.
And I think for most people, it's just,
Exactly.
the people that ask me, like, how do you do that? And I'm like, well, your first step is, you go to Orbitz and you buy a flight to wherever it is you're going. And then once you have the flight.
Yeah. Make sure to sign up though first for frequent flyer miles. So many people I talk to don't have frequent flyer
Yeah.
accounts and they are
Yeah,
missing
yeah, yeah.
out. So get yourself a credit card that gets you points. Sign up for your frequent flyer account before you book your trip and then go to Orbit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But wherever it is, buy your flight first, because once you bought your flight, and if it's non-refundable, you're forced, you either lose the flight or you have to get a hotel room. And then once you have a hotel room and a flight, you're probably not going to cancel it. And then from there, you're going to figure it out. That's what I did.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But let me ask you, what brought you into the law business? What was your reasoning for wanting to be a lawyer?
Everybody, when people ask that, they always want a response about something like, I wanted to uphold the Constitution, or I wanted to defend the innocent or defend the criminals, whatever it is. And I've had clients over the years write me emails that say things like, I know you went into the law to uphold the Constitution. That seems to be a
we need someone to do that, by the way, but
and
I'll keep my opinions on that to myself.
we do. But no, I went into law school because I graduated university really young and much younger than most people. And I really liked school. And I didn't want to go out into the workforce at age 19.
You finished undergrad at 19?
Get a job.
Oh,
I did.
God.
Yeah. Yeah. You didn't know that. Yeah. Different story. But so at 19, I said, I don't want to I want to continue in school. I like school. I'm good at school. How can I stay in school the longest? Was sort of my thought process. And I said, okay, well, really my two options are I could be a doctor or I could be a lawyer. Those are, a master's degree that's only going to get you 2 more years. I want to prolong it a little bit more. Most people, probably you, are thinking, hell, I just wanted as quickly out of school as I possibly could have. I would have loved to stay in school forever. And so being a doctor was obviously off the table. There's no way that I was going to pass any of the entrance exams. I hadn't really had math. I hadn't had a good science foundation in university level. And so I signed up. I took the LSAT about 2 weeks later and I went to law school, really without knowing very much about it, other than knowing I'd like to talk. The LSAT was doable and it seemed like a good career choice for me. But there wasn't a lot of thought that went into it. So that's how I ended up being a lawyer. And I think on reflection, that was sort of the universe guiding me into a job that was perfect for me. Not necessarily the practice of law, although I really like being a lawyer, but the flexibility that the way the practice of law has changed has been instrumental for me. Because if I had ended up going to medical school, that's a job that requires you to, maybe not so much with telehealth these days, but to be more tied to a hospital, to a practice, right? Physically to be there with a patient. And for me with the law, it's been wonderful and has led to a good lifestyle of sort of adaptability as things come up. There's a lot of interesting changes in the law. I work with software and technology clients, primarily SaaS. And SaaS, I don't know if you know what that is, but it's software as a service. So this Riverside that we're using right now
software
is
as a service.
like a SaaS product, right? Yeah, cloud stuff. And there's so much happening there in the future. There's so much happening with the AI in that respect in the future, with data in the future. And I think it's just going to grow and grow. So ultimately, it was a good decision for me. That I didn't, as a teenager, put a lot of thought into, but I'm very happy that there was something guiding me into a good career decision and not a bad one.
And interestingly enough, when I was sitting down writing these questions, I think I texted you this. I was like, it's interesting. I didn't realize how much that we had shared and how much we had in common until I really sat down and was trying to figure out what information that my audience might want to hear and that I wanted to hear. From you, but we've shared a lot. One, and I don't know. Secondly, I don't know where I was going with that. I might have to edit this part out because completely forgot where I was going. But yeah, we just had a lot of history together. But what ended up taking you to Europe for that? I mean, I assume all the travel, and then you pair that with the law practice that you ended up doing, and then your travel experience, your law practice, and somehow you ended up in international business in Europe.
I did. So when you were living across the street from me, I was working for a law firm that it doesn't exist anymore, actually, but I was doing insurance tender defense. So essentially, if somebody would go to a big retailer and they would slip and fall, or they would cut their hand off in a lawnmower, I was doing the defense work for that across the 7-state territory. And what we did was have local firms in those different regions. It was Florida, it was the Carolinas, Virginia, Georgia, and say, okay, lawnmower company, you are the ones that put the lawnmower into the box. It's your fault that it didn't have an instruction booklet with it. So although we're being sued because we sold it, you have to come and pay for the defense and settle this with the plaintiff. So that was the kind of work that I did for quite a few years. Then I got married, and my husband at the time, he had an opportunity to do a fellowship in Europe that was supposed to be for 2 years. So we said, this is a great opportunity. You know, we were in our late 20s and thought it's not far enough in our lives or in my practice at this point where that's going to be a hindrance if I want to come back to be at a bigger law firm. So let's go do it. You know, they're not paying him anything really, not very much, but enough. And we get to travel around to 3 different locations. So it was France, 2 locations in France, in Prague, and then in the Netherlands. And when this opportunity for him came up, I went to my law firm and I said, hey guys, can I just go away for 2 years? Then I'll be back, but I can work remotely. Because even at that point, and this was 2013 or so, we were not really seeing the clients very much, right? Everything was already through email, through phone. Very, very, very rarely was somebody in the office, at least for the type of work that I did. Of course, if you needed to go take a deposition or go to court, that's a different story, but that's not what I was doing very frequently. And they said, no, this is not comfortable for us, for you to be overseas. And I think these days, everybody's doing it, right? And all of these law firms, not just law firms, but companies in general, everyone is working from home. COVID really was a game changer there. But so I set up my own practice. And initially I thought maybe I'll make a few $100, right? A month. Maybe I'll make something small. And I thought that I would do it working with like product manufacturers, because that was sort of the background that I had, right? I was working a lot with companies whose products had been sold and then they'd injured somebody. So I thought I can work with product manufacturers and say, these are the warning labels you have to have, the type of insurance you have to have, your risk exposure if you're going to sell in the US markets. And for whatever reason, it's very quickly morphed into working with software technology, SaaS products, just because that's what people are doing these days, right? Some e-commerce sort of product stuff, but mainly these days it quickly diverted. And that was 11 years ago.
Wow.
So, and still doing it. So very happy with it.
So I don't know if you know this, but when I was writing these questions, and really thinking about the information that I wanted to take from you, I recognized and I realized that I remember a time in my life when you had just left Atlanta and you had gone abroad and you had just started working as an attorney abroad. I don't know if you remember, but you did a couple of contracts for me and a couple of bios that I believe you wrote up for me.
For your mattress
so
stuff.
When all that was happening, you actually became a big time inspiration for me. And you may not know that. In fact, I didn't remember it until now, right? When I was putting those questions together, because I was in the furniture business at the time. I was making great money. It was incredible. But at the time, some things had started to change in the industry where I was just feeling like I could do more and wanted to do more, not necessarily monetarily, but just something that would helped me grow more. And then I see you, right? At this time, you're like living in all these cool places, and you're doing your work from wherever you want to be. And again, like you just said, that was way before COVID, 7-8 years before COVID. And not a lot of people were doing it then. I spent so much of my time trying to figure out how I could set up something to be completely location independent like you were doing. So you were definitely a big time inspiration for me to move on. It was you. And as funny as this is going to sound, it was Tim Ferriss that wrote the 4-Hour Work Week. I'm seeing you do all this, having a good time. And then I'm seeing this dude, Tim Ferriss, write this really cool book that just sounded, absolutely incredible. And a couple years later, I was doing it. So thank you for that. It's been incredible.
Well, thank you for saying. Nobody's told me that I'm an inspiration.
Yeah, no, it was. And I did not remember it until I started writing down, what I wanted to talk with you about. And then I remember I remember this, So, yeah.
Well, it was so much harder back then that it would be for somebody starting out today. I remember I was talking to somebody else about this back in 2013 or so. There wasn't, as crazy as this sounds, there wasn't good internet, right? In a lot of places. So I was in France, and it was really difficult to get internet. You couldn't go to, not every restaurant had internet. The phone packages that you were getting at the time still had quite restricted amounts of data. So I would be at somewhere like McDonald's trying to download email or get instructions from a client or upload a contract. And now a huge amount of the work that I do is in data, is in cybersecurity sort of fields. And I think I'm so horrified now that I think about that I was on the public Wi-Fi at McDonald's
downloading classified information,
trying to do my little hustle, get the business running, trying to get a contract that probably took 40 minutes to upload on this Wi-Fi in the south of France. And how big of a change to now? Because, for example, in Europe, I don't know when this started, maybe 2017, 2018, I don't remember. But now you can have one SIM card that works everywhere in Europe. And I have unlimited data because things like phones and data are considered a utility now. It's really a lot cheaper actually in Europe than in America to get data and phone cards. I think I pay like $30 a month for completely unlimited data, and it works everywhere in Europe. They said, no, it's it's sort of this free market. We're not going to put you on roaming if you go to Germany or to Belgium or to France. One card will work everywhere. That wasn't the case 10 years ago.
You had to change SIM cards everywhere you went.
It was terrible. And how much the world has changed without me really paying attention to it is kind of crazy. But to think that I was doing all of that without Wi-Fi, and we were also, we were in places that, we were traveling a lot. We probably traveled a third of the year to Timbuktu, anywhere and everywhere. We were traveling a lot anyway, sort of maybe a third of the time. And because of the program that my ex-husband was in, they had us living in almost like student housing as well. So here I am around all of these Erasmus students, and they're maybe 18, 19 years old. I'm trying to run a law firm. The internet doesn't work. Half the time my phone doesn't work. We have laundry like hung in this dorm room everywhere. And somehow a decade later, I look back and think, wow, it's been a crazy adventure, but it's been a good one.
So in many ways, you were kind of the backpacker lawyer in the beginning, which is not most attorneys' typical story.
Well, no, not really. But definitely what people would not think of.
The nomad. Let's say like the nomad, maybe the nomad attorney, something like that.
Yeah. And it's not that way anymore. But it's been an adventure. I was in Nepal. I did, this was back right before COVID happened. I sort of took a not a spiritual journey. That makes me sound like a hippie, but I thought I would go. I had been crazy story, actually. You and I both like scuba diving and quite a lot. And I had been on a scuba diving trip in Egypt, which I'm obsessed with scuba diving in Egypt. If anybody's not been to Egypt for scuba diving, I highly, highly recommend it.
I saw your pictures. That was your Red Sea trip.
But I do it every year.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So you should come next year.
Yeah, I should.
Yeah.
You're right. I agree.
It's cheap. It's great. But Egypt gets a bad rap unnecessarily. So I've been, as a solo female, I have been probably 5 or 6 times now just by myself. And I really, really.
When are you going? Send me the information.
Unsafe.
That's awesome.
I will.
Yeah, I want to do that.
We'll do it. But I was on this trip in Egypt and met somebody who said, "You seem a little sad." I was going through some difficult things in my life. He said, "You seem a little sad. We're going on this trip to Nepal in a month or 2 months. Do you want to come?" So I came back home and I thought, okay, I'll come. So I was in Nepal. We did this Annapurna circuit up at 5,400 meters. So at the high base camp.
We're losing it.
Everyone there was working. There was internet. We're all sitting there on our laptops working. It's amazing how much the world has changed, how much you sort of run into people who are doing whatever they're doing, whatever kind of business they have, in the middle of absolute nowhere that you walked for 2 weeks to get to. And here we are. Here's internet. Everybody sitting there with a cup of tea. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely changed. I'm in Colombia right now, and I don't know how many countries I've been to since COVID, but several. I traveled most of last year. I was in Mexico, and everywhere you go, you're seeing Americans all over the place, and they're sitting on their laptops working from there. And back in the day, these were guys, and then there's still a significant amount of them, right, that are just teaching English online, making $800 a month or something like that, right? But then there's also these guys now that are iBankers, guys that have their own real estate businesses in every sector. Are traveling all around the world now, right? Because it's just everything's changed. Do you speaking of scuba diving, we also jumped out of a plane together. I don't know if you remember that.
You did. I do remember that. And I remember that we. Do you remember that we played kickball together?
Yeah, I do remember that. With that was in with like Holly and that whole group played, right? And then there was the blonde headed girl. Can't remember her name.
And I remember that we planned that skydiving. We were at a pool. We were at a swimming pool. For whatever reason, I'm not very good with remembering images at all, but I very clearly remember this, that we were at a swimming pool, probably drinking a bit, and that whole kickball group was there. And I was looking at Groupon. We bought our skydiving tickets from Groupon.
I remember that now.
We were maybe a little bit intoxicated at a swimming pool with our kickball team. And so that group of us went. Now I'm a little horrified to think that we did a Groupon skydiving, but we did. Yeah,
I remember that. And then, now it's coming back to me. By the way, that's not the only crazy thing that I've done after a few drinks. I've made a lot of, a lot of decisions that could have kept me from being here today. Well,
did you jump out of any more planes? Maybe off some bridges?
I jumped out of planes again, but I didn't do it. I don't remember doing it after Groupon. I think they were all pretty well planned, and I was sober at the time. But maybe the first time that's what it took, right? Maybe I needed a little Jack Daniels to get the guts to be able to jump out of a plane, because that wasn't easy, man. That was hard.
It was a pretty I don't think we were drunk when we jumped out of the plane, but it was definitely sort of, we booked it on a Friday and then we went and did it on a Sunday or something very, very quick. It was the discounted, 75% off Groupon skydiving.
$13 jump out of a plane. That is not a good idea. I don't recommend it to anyone listening right now.
But we survived. All of us survived. Had some cool pictures.
My buddy jumped out of a plane in South America. I think it was in Colombia. I can't remember where it was. And he said literally they took a bungee cord and closed the plane door on the way up. And he was like, I'm not so sure. He was like, by the time I got to the top, I was so scared that it was better to jump out than it was to stay in. So I didn't even care. I was like, let's get the hell out of this thing.
Oh. Have you ever been bungee jumping?
No, and I don't even know if I could do it, honestly. I could jump out of a plane 100 more times, no problem. But I don't know that I could even bungee jump. There's something about seeing how close the ground is that messes with me.
For me, it's the whiplash that you must get that doesn't seem
I don't
fun,
know. I love jumping out of planes though, and in fact, I thought about taking it to another level and learning how to do it myself. And then I was like, I don't know. I'm so ADD. I'd forget I was flying. I'd forget to pull the cord. I'm going to leave that up to someone else. Forget to take my Adderall.
Speaking of Nepal, I did the coolest thing in Nepal. I did this parapunting. I don't know what you call it in Europe they call it parapunting, paragliding, right? Which is also a sort of a tandem thing. You have like a hill and then you run. It was the most chill experience.
I've done it several times in Colombia.
Yeah, I really liked that. I really, really enjoyed paragliding in Nepal. So highly recommended to anyone who says, going to go to Nepal. It doesn't seem like it would be on top of anybody's list for Nepal, but it was great. Really calm, chill.
I know we've indirectly hit on this, but to be a little more specific, how do you feel like travel's changed you now that you're looking back on it, 20 years later, 25 years later?
Well, my whole life later, right? With my parents. I feel as though, that's a good question. I think it's made me a braver person, a much more self-reliant person. Sure. I think that I can always figure my way out of it, whatever situation comes up. And a more understanding person. I think in the States with not at all, I don't want to talk about politics, but you have sort of this big polarization happening, right? And you have this camp thinks that they are 100% correct about everything. You have this camp over here, they're 100% correct about everything. But they don't have the exposure, right? They don't realize there's 5,000 other camps that think different things. And I think for me, it's made me more of a calmer person. In that sense, it's made me more
like accepting, maybe accepting of
anyone's point of view. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but accepting. I will say, living in the Netherlands is quite good for that. The Dutch people are, on the surface, although I think in reality they're not, but on the surface, there very much is this attitude here in the culture of you do you as long as it doesn't harm me.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's not the case in the States at all. I mean, it's very judgmental on all sides. It's just a judgmental place. And I was speaking to a guy yesterday who's had a very interesting take on this, and I thought through it a lot last night, and I totally agree with him. I've thought about it myself, but when you're in the States and you only stay in the States, no matter where it is, and no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, that it's irrelevant or completely independent of political belief. But we, we're brainwashed into thinking we live in the land of the free, right? And don't get me wrong, hands down would rather be in the U.S. than most anywhere in the world when it comes to personal freedoms. I'm not saying that it's not free there. It is, but there's also this more freeing feeling of being somewhere like South America. As an example, in South America, if you're speeding and you're going too fast, no one cares. Just don't kill anyone, right? Like, no one really cares. And for the most part, people don't drive like total idiots as a result. It's not like you take the cops away and you take the speed limit away and all of a sudden people just you think it's the Autobahn where they don't think it's a racetrack all of a sudden. So there's this freeing feeling of being able to do certain things knowing you're not going to get in trouble for it. One is driving down the road in a car. Yeah. I mean, in the States, I just was back there and, my brother-in-law's kind of big in the state police and I think he has a high position. And I remember, we're at family dinner and he's like, yeah, we did a sting yesterday and he wrote 16 speeding tickets and he's a really good guy. He's not the guy that's but he's not trying to just get people. He's an incredible dude, but the system teaches them that that's their job. Your job is to go out and write tickets for people speeding. So me as a citizen, I have to worry. I have to sit behind the wheel and drive 10-2 and stay in my lane, right? And then I have to make sure that I'm not going more than 3 to 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, because there's a good possibility that in that big forest up there, there's a cop hidden in the bushes so I can't see him and trying to write me a $250 speeding ticket. So
yeah,
he was giving his examples on that and how much freer he feels living outside the U.S. And I was like, wow, he's right. Like,
yeah.
Now, I also, the other side of that, though, is, Jess, I do like being able to go to the U.S. and tell the president I think he's a fucking idiot without any repercussions. That's kind of cool, right? And you can't do that in most other countries. So there's two sides to the story.
There are. And, it's like the argument about the drinking age in Europe, right? That people are not going crazy when the drinking age is 16 or 18 versus they are because it's, off limits, hush, hush, you can't be drinking in the States, right? It's the same sort of thing that you're saying about the speed limit or driving in somewhere in South America. It's not as though people go crazy when you have fewer restrictions that are being enforced. It's more just, this is how it is. So why should we go crazy? And I think that there's certainly things to be said. So I think something else that how travel has changed me is for my own work and maybe for yours as well. But I work with very much teams that are quite globally dispersed, right? So again, a lot of software tech companies, they are not just having a headquarters in New York City and only people sitting in New York City. These days, they're having teams all over the place. So maybe their development is coming from Ukraine or Poland. Maybe their customer support or customer success is located in India. Maybe their sales team is located in Norway. Who knows, right? But that sort of setup is quite normal. And if I had never traveled, I don't think that I would have been able to assimilate into working in those types of environments because I wouldn't have the cultural adaptability, right? I would just say, this is America. This is how it's done. We have to do it this way versus knowing that actually there's teams that are doing as equally, if not better, than what an American employee
by doing
would
it a
be
different
doing,
way,
right? That are all over the globe, right? There's sort of this narcissism that can sometimes come with thinking the American employees, we have to hire American, we have to do this, we have to do that, the company has to be here. And the reality is, at least with whom I work, and I have worked with, and I still do work with quite a few tech unicorns, right? Who have really, really massive amounts of investor funding in the millions, in the billions. And they're coming out of places in Eastern Europe. They're coming out of places in Northern Europe. And the teams are everywhere. And there is no way I think that I could have been as respected by those teams, that I could have been as valuable of a team member as a lawyer if I came in and said,
I'm from Kansas.
This is America.
I've never
we're
left
doing it the
Kansas.
American way.
Yeah.
No. And especially because a lot of my focus is on Europe, right? Because a lot of the companies that I work with, and maybe they're starting out sort of in Europe, they're wanting to move into the North American
Primarily, you're working, just to clarify,
Australia.
primarily you're working with people outside the U.S. that would like to penetrate the North American markets.
Sometimes, or they're U.S. and they want to get into the European or Australian markets, right? So I do a lot with Europe, North America, and APAC. But people just do.
Well, I don't think you'd
right?
be able to balance, if you hadn't had your travel experience, you'd have never been able to balance those languages, cultures, and 50 different legal systems. You wouldn't have even understood how to go about learning, right?
Exactly. And if you're thinking, I don't know for Latin America, that's a jurisdiction that I don't know that much about, an area of the world that I don't know as much about as you do. What I know about is Europe and North America when we talk about software and tech and Eurasia or Asia. But especially if you look at the Europeans are not used to working insularly within their own country, right? They are very much
worldly
used to
by birth.
They're worldly, right? So they're not here in the Netherlands. A company is not just going to be a Dutch tech company. They're going to have teams all over Europe. They're going to have team members from all over Europe. So you need to be able to fit into that and not come in sort of as the American bulldozing bulldog that I think that so many people have this mindset in America. And without the travel, without those experiences, I'm sure that I would have had the same mindset.
Yeah, for sure.
So
for sure.
It's been invaluable.
Yeah. So with the technology sector, obviously ever changing, right? It never, if it's like if we don't continue to advance technology, I don't know. You just see it's just evolving rapidly, constantly. What's working today? If you're not constantly working on it, it's going to be completely irrelevant tomorrow. Where do you see this going globally? Do you see more, I guess, globalization in terms of technology, and what kind of opportunities do you see for a new entrepreneur or an existing entrepreneur maybe trying to enter the North American markets?
Of course I see that. I think that it's both expanding and contracting at the same time, if that makes any sense. So we have the expansion with the dispersed workforces. We have the expansion with AI, of course, and there's so much that can be said about AI and how that's going. But we also have a bit of contracting that's happening. We have countries that are looking around, whose populations are looking around and saying, we're not sure that we want to be as global as we are being. So maybe we want to put up restrictions. Maybe we want to put up trade restrictions. And you think software technology, does that have trade restrictions? It does, in similar ways, not exactly the same way as importing, exporting goods from China, but there are import-export laws that impact things like software and things like technology products. So I am seeing, on the one hand, a lot more flexibility, especially if we look at Europe at the moment, because again, a lot of my practice these days focuses on data and cybersecurity. And in Europe, until just a few months ago, we had that, I don't want to call it a blockage, but we had a lawsuit that had come out from the European Court of Justice a few years ago that made transferring data from Europe to the US much more difficult. And software technology cloud products, they're transferring your data left to right. You have no idea, right? And now that has sort of been lifted. There's other restrictions there. So I think that is going to become easier for the short run. So there will be more of an opportunity for these cross-border transfers in the very short run. I think we're going to have another decision that's going to make that a little bit more difficult in the next year or two. But for the short run, it's easier. So there's more flexibility. There's more opportunity for growth for these companies that are working in North America and Europe and transferring the data. There wasn't for the last few years. Not that they couldn't do it, but the compliance was more difficult. At the same time, I am seeing my U.S. clients and entrepreneurs and startups that I talk to, whereas before maybe they were more willing to hire outsourced teams, I am seeing that shrink a little bit. That there is starting to be, again, a little bit more focus on let's hire more
closer to
locally.
home.
And I don't know necessarily what's driving that. Is it politics? Is it fear of what's happening in the world with wars and the economy? But that has been interesting. But obviously, the world is just going to continue to globalize and expand.
Be more interconnected. And yeah, I think so too.
There's internet everywhere now, not just at McDonald's. So.
I was gonna ask you how much better is McDonald's in Europe than it is in the US? I don't even eat McDonald's in the US. I think it's disgusting, but I do eat it sometimes when I'm international because it's actually good.
I don't think it's so expensive.
Is it?
Ooh. So here in the Netherlands, I don't know exactly the prices because I also don't ever eat at McDonald's, but they have this dollar menu in the States, right? I don't know what's on it. Maybe it's like a hamburger and a cheeseburger and a small fries or something. That doesn't exist. I think to get a hamburger, it's probably $4 or $5.
Jesus. You might as well just get a good one at that point, right?
Very expensive.
Yeah. You might as well get like real beef at that point.
Yeah. It's interesting what's more expensive here and what's more expensive in the US. You look at these studies, right? That, I don't know, that Forbes or US News and World Report publishes those sort of metric studies where they say happiest country or most expensive cities to live in or most expensive place to buy a cup of coffee. they sort of compare the cost of living. And I always think it's really interesting because they might say, oh, it's so much more expensive to live in Europe. Some things are more expensive, weird things that you wouldn't think are more expensive. But then things you wouldn't think about that are more expensive in the States. It's just different. Food is much cheaper in Europe, at least where I am, which is not a cheap.
It's probably actually
country at
real,
all.
and they're not actually manufacturing it in a plant. That's probably why.
Maybe I don't think so. The Dutch, they are one of the biggest consumers of unhealthy food in Europe, but it's a little bit cheaper. But then there are, but things in the States, cars are much cheaper in the States. Clothes are much cheaper in the States. The same sort of pair of tennis shoes is going to cost you $100 in the States and $200 here. Personal care stuff, like to go get a massage or things like that, way more expensive in the States, which makes no sense to me. But
well, it's the same. It's the same in South America, and especially in Colombia, they just don't see health as a profit center. I think that's the difference. I think many other countries that I've visited around the world, they see health as just something that it should be everyone's number one priority should be their health, right? And it looks like in Colombia, there's a gym that I go to, and not all of them are like this, but there's a gym that I go to, and you pay like $20 for the annual membership, $25 for the annual membership, and you get discounted monthly rates, which are like $25 per month after that. And along with that comes one doctor appointment per year, which they go like head to toe. They check everything. They send a plan over to the personal training team, and then they put together a personal training team, and you have a trainer every time you go to the gym for the same $25 a month. So it's like little stuff like that they just see as health. They're not trying to make profits from it.
Yeah. Yeah. The same thing here. The gyms are dirt cheap here, surprisingly. They're open hours that would make Americans cry, I think, from like 8 a.m. till 6 o'clock at night. But
I'd be pissed. I couldn't go. I wouldn't go.
There's no 24/7 concept, but things are changing.
So quickly, going back to the entrepreneur thing, but if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm trying to expand internationally right now, what are some of the biggest legal pitfalls that someone should watch out for? Obviously, there's going to be a million of them, but what are the two most common ones you see?
What is your product?
I'm in SaaS. I'm in SaaS, just like
you're in SaaS. Biggest pitfalls. Do you have insurance that covers North America and that covers Europe? This insurance is something that people don't think about, and it is by far the number one protector of your business. So if you're a SaaS company, do you have E&O? So that stands for errors and omissions insurance. Do you have cyber insurance as part of your policy? You should make some notes here if you're going to start a new venture.
I have it recorded. My system automatically records, so I can just go back to it.
Yeah, exactly. I have a great broker, actually. No kickbacks. Maybe I should talk to him and see if I can get an affiliate link set up. But cyber is so critical. A lot of times these days, they'll roll your cyber policy into your E&O policy. But if you're doing SaaS, anything, you have an app, you have cloud computing, something, a new software. If you are selling actual products, right? And by products, I don't mean digital goods, but I mean products. You're doing drop shipping, you're doing FBA, or whatever. You have your own e-commerce store. That you also need to get insurance for. And here's the tricky part for that is that North America, so you can get a global policy that covers everywhere. It'll cover Latin America, it'll cover Australia, it'll cover Europe, Asia, maybe not Asia, but most of it all under one policy. The outlier is going to be the US. You have to get a separate policy for the US because there will be exclusions that say, we're not letting you do this. Why? Going back to what I told you back in Atlanta, what I was doing was that tort law, right? I buy a candle, it explodes, it burns my house down, my grandchild is in the house, and my pet rabbit, right? So I'm going to sue for $500 million against, Joe's Candle Company. So because of that, you have to have a separate policy for the US. You absolutely have to do it. So that is something I would watch out for legally. I would watch out for, how are you classifying your workers? Are they employees or are they contractors? In the US, that's important. Everybody gets it wrong. Everybody wants to just hire contractors. You need to look at the cases on Uber and Lyft and Uber Eats and all of this. Make sure you're doing it correctly. If you want to hire people overseas, an ERO, which is a employer of record, that allows you to hire actual employees. Say that you want to hire an employee in Colombia. You can use an ERO. You have employees then in Colombia who are your employees, but they're hired through their named employer is a different company. That's a great service that you can get pretty cheaply, and that allows you to really enter this sort of global workspace. So if you want to have customer service in Indonesia and India and wherever you want to have it, there are these EOR firms. Many of them are online. Many of them are targeted at startups, at small businesses. Check those out. Get your privacy policy, your data stuff correct. You can go from tiny to sky's the limit on how much you want to do, but there are a lot of fines. And something that I'm seeing come up, two things I'm seeing come up a lot, that especially small businesses, sort of entrepreneurs, well, three things, but I'll keep it to two. We can do another podcast and we can go into more depth, but I'll keep it to two. That I see companies really screw up. These are companies that are trying to get the conversions. They're trying to get the sales. You're a sales guy. You're focused on this. I'm not a salesperson really, but I work with sales team members every single day. So I understand they come to me and I don't want to be the department of no, where I say, we're not doing this, because they're going to go do it anyway. But where I'm seeing things come up a lot very recently are TCPA violations, which is where companies are signing up and they're texting people through their platforms, right? In the US, it's not so common to do that. In other countries, Central America, I'm sure, South America, Europe, not so common, Middle East, very common. Companies are sending text messages, sign up for our services, do this, do this. Companies are doing that more and more in the States, and they're getting massive lawsuits.
Totally illegal, yeah.
I'm also seeing companies get in a lot of trouble in this SaaS realm with pixels, with chatbots that are violating wiretapping laws, the claims say. So if you want to talk about that more, you can find me. We can talk about it. But there's certainly interesting things that are happening that people don't think about.
But obviously,
people like you
obviously,
no idea.
Obviously, you can help with all this, right? So if there's an entrepreneur out there and he needs your services, that's what you're doing.
Yeah. And what's difficult, I think, Matt, is that people like you, okay, you've been around the block, you've talked to me before, so you know some of the things that you want to focus on. But if you are a new person, you just quit the furniture business, you think, I have a great idea for an app to do, I don't know, furniture rental, right? We're going to rent furniture sets to college students for their dorm rooms, whatever it is. We're going to get an app for this. And you want to make the app and you're 22 years old. You would have no idea of the legal pitfalls. And there are so many things that can be disastrous, but they're so easy to manage if you get good advice.
Yeah.
Right? If you take the moment to pause and make sure that you're not jumping into it without any
don't do it
on.
yourself. Don't jump off the boat alone, if you will, for lack of better.
Have you had anything come up that you thought, wow, that was not something that I knew about or thought about?
As far as lawsuits, no. I've been lucky in that regard for sure. I mean, for the most part, I've had good backing and good help with getting contracts together and those types of things. Where I was the most worried was definitely the car business, the rental car business, because I was just sure that was going to turn into, I did it anyway because I knew there was going to be a lot of money in it. So as an entrepreneur, you're like, okay, I can definitely see this being a massive insurance issue, but I know I can do very well at this and it's kind of a cool business. So I'm going to do it anyway. It was important to me for whatever reason. And I did it anyway. Now, I will say, we had insurance from the beginning and we were in some ways double covered with some third party people that we were using that also covered the car when it was out on rental. But we did a lot of things in the beginning. I would say I went 6 months before I really said, okay, maybe I should get like an umbrella type policy for this. We just kept renting and and there were things that happened. We had some pretty. Yeah.
Here's something that I would have told you is I see a lot of people, especially when they're just starting out, that are entrepreneurs, that there would have been ways to protect you Matt, even without the insurance, of course, I'm going to say insurance, but there would have been ways to protect you by making corporate structures.
Well, we
right?
had that. So that
By
was what I
having
think.
IP. Yeah. And I see a lot of people, they might get the LLC and they think I have an LLC, this is it. But they don't do things correctly to protect themselves.
They breach the corporate veil.
This is so common. They breach the corporate veil, especially for high energy entrepreneurs. I have a client right now who is absolutely lovely. It's a couple of guys that have come together. They do some guitar related stuff. I won't go into too much detail, but one of their members, he's constantly putting it, not now he's doing cash injections because we've been over it, but that would say, oh, I want to develop this new, I don't know, guitar doohickey, right? And I'm just going to go out myself. I'm going to pay to have it developed. I'm not going to use the company for it, but it's the company's. I'm going to say it belongs to the company, but I'm going to use all my own funds. And there we go. It's easy things. We just have to make sure that you've sat down, had a strategy, and don't breach your corporate veil.
Yeah, and
maybe that should be number one tip as an entrepreneur.
Let's now that we're talking about breaching the corporate veil, let's go into that a little bit. The way I understand breaching the corporate veil is it doesn't take much for an attorney to come in and prove that I've breached my corporate veil. And from what I understand, it can be as easy as if they can prove that I've used that business bank account for personal funds or those personal funds for business funds, they can prove that I've breached the corporate veil in any minor way, then that lawsuit holds up from the other side, right? Essentially, in layman's terms.
Yeah. So when we talk about breaching the corporate veil, we're actually past the lawsuit stage in most instances. So what's happened is somebody, again, you're Joe candle maker, your candle blew up. And they want to say your candle company's bankrupt now, obviously, right? Because you killed a rabbit and you killed the grandchild and you burnt down the house. So there's no money left in the company. So what do they want to do? They want to go to Joe because you've sold 50 billion candles on your e-commerce store. And you go on YouTube and you keep talking about how you've made, 300 million in the last 5 years. So they say, you have some money. So we want you to pay for the rest of this. So you're usually sort of past that lawsuit. You're at the settlement's already there. The judgment's already there. They're just trying to get the money now, right? And your company doesn't have enough, so they want to get the money from you. I think you give good examples, and you give good examples of what I would tell my clients too, right? Because I want to put a lot of fear in them. But if you have a good bookkeeper, they can fix that. You can use the company bank account once in a while. I'm not saying do it, but you need to record it correctly, right? The company gave you a loan. Did you sign a loan agreement with the company? Have you paid back the loan for, I'm not saying go buy a jet ski, but did the company, did you buy 2 meals that you shouldn't have with the company bank account, right? That's what we're talking about.
Absolutely. No, I just wanted to put that on the, into layman's terms so that people actually understood it. Like there's so many small things that a good attorney can flip on you when in terms of breaching the corporate veil.
So get a good bookkeeper that knows how to do things like structure things as either expenses from you or loans to you. There are rules that have to be followed. You need to be signing a note every time if you're going to take debt from your company. But really what we're talking about is this theory of alter ego. So is it Matt's car company or is it Matt, the car company, right? And there has to be a difference. You have to sort of treat the car company as a separate person than you.
It is a separate person, essentially.
And that's a lot of what it comes down to. It's this alter ego.
Yeah, we had some issues in the car business where, we definitely had some major lawsuits, but luckily I was structured and set up in a way to where it all came down on the insurance company every time. And so I didn't actually have to go and do anything, and none of it was our fault ever. It was always people that we had driving, it was nothing we did. Just car crashes where everybody tries to sue like in Georgia, for example. You have to name everyone when there's like a lawsuit with cars. You have to name everyone's on every title, so that you get these suits in the mail that really don't have anything to do with you necessarily, but your name's on the title. So you get letters in
Yeah.
the mail and questions. And I mean,
So are you fully out of the car
I'm done
business now?
Yeah, I'm out. And I actually I've thought about getting back in, but the capital, and I'm at a point where it's everything that I want to do going forward is either using someone else's money or something that's low CapEx, right? I injected a lot of money into the car business, and I injected a lot of money into the mattress business. I lost every freaking dime I put in the mattress business, by the way. But the car business, I didn't. I mean, we did really well with the car business. But it's such a big capital investment. And that business changed to where, before we were making $2,000-$3,000 on a lot of our better cars every month, one car. And now you can't do that. It's just not the same. There's more competition kind of doing the same thing we were doing. And I just frankly, to make it work, you can't just go out and put one or two cars on the road like I did in the beginning. I got really lucky looking back on it because I had a really good car that I started it with. And then I went and bought some really good cars to follow it up with kind of slowly. And I was very lucky that no wrecks happened the first 6 months to a year and no major mechanical problems happened that first 6 months to a year, because it allowed me to build up some capital and then invest somewhat from what we had made from profits. But then I was also putting money out of my own, what I had before into it. So now if I were telling someone to start that business over again, you really need about 10 cars to just start, because out of the 10 cars, you're going to have 3 or 4 off the road at the mechanic all the time, because there's always issues with cars. And in order to just get enough cash flow coming in every month to where you can pay for those issues that arise, there's no way to even start. I mean, it's not that there's no way. It's just you're really putting your back up against the wall if you're starting with less than 10 based on what our numbers were 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. Maybe now you probably need 15 or 20, because I just don't think you're making the same money you used to in that business. So, I mean, we're talking about, even on used cars, $130,000, $150,000 investment, in my opinion, to get back in it. And that's just a start. That's just to get off the ground. And at this point, I just want to do things that are like low CapEx.
Seems like an exhausting business.
Oh, it's crazy. And in the beginning, it was me. It was me and one other guy. It's a 24-hour-a-day business because you're renting to Uber drivers. And so if I'm renting to you from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., somebody's there at 4 p.m. to pick it up at 4:30 or 5, right? So you got to figure out how you're going to get that thing clean from 4 to 4:30 and get it ready for your 4:30 guy. And it's going 24 hours. So if there's an issue, I mean, and these things get wrecked, they have mechanical issues 24 hours a day. And when you're the CEO, the janitor, the investor, the security guy, you're everything, right? In the beginning in any business, as you know, you don't have all these people to help you out. So you're getting these 2 a.m. phone calls consistently, actually, of just stupid people. I mean, I had a guy call me one time that didn't know how to put air in a tire. He said, this tire, the car's saying that the air's low in the tire, and I don't know how to put air in a tire. I need you to tell me how to do this, or I'm just going to leave it on the side of the road. And I'm like, dude, if you don't know how to put air in the tire as a licensed driver, man, you got a bigger problem than me.
Maybe shouldn't be doing
I'm not the problem. And well, I am the problem because I rented to somebody like you that doesn't know how to put air in a freaking tire, right? So it's stuff like that. And it's 24 hours a day. And then once you get 30, which is what I had in the end, once you have 30 cars and it's you and one other guy doing it, it's a total disaster because, I mean, you just can't keep up with it, And these people sometimes would leave these cars on the side of the road and they just leave them. I had trackers on them.
Did you have any cars get stolen?
Sure. All the time. They get stolen all the time. And I would find them because I had them tracked. Really? Now, none of my cars luckily got stolen to where I never got it back. But they got stolen consistently, and I had the trackers. So I would send, people out to track them down and tow them back to me. And you would not believe. We could do a whole entire show on that car business. It was wild. It was like the Wild West, 24 hours a day of just unbelievable stuff. People slept in them. You wouldn't believe how many people brought the cars back, and you'd find quilts and pillows where they literally had rented the cars to sleep in the back of the car.
Really? It was cheaper than renting a hotel or something.
I think that was probably some of it. And then I think there was this, some of these Uber drivers figure out that when you rent a car, when you rent, you can't drive enough to pay for a place to stay and pay for your food and pay for the car and gas and all that stuff. So the only way to even be able to take enough money home to pay, your basic necessities is you got to cut something out. You either have to cut food out or you have to cut your apartment out. So I did this when I got in this business. I wanted to study every piece of the business, and my drivers kept lying to me. They were lying about how much they were making, all this stuff. So after about a year, I was like, all right, I got to figure this out, right? And so I signed up. I signed up as a driver, and I went and took one of my cars and I drove it for a month. And I took every single note. I'm like, literally, if I start at 4 a.m. to 12 noon, how much am I making? How much is it costing me in gas and all this stuff? Because I was trying to figure out that balance of price, and then also like how much can I charge these people and me make money and be able to allow them to make money. Because in fairness, I'm not the guy that's going to charge so much that, people are like, screw this guy, he's gouging me and I'm never going to come back, right? I want them to come back. So I want them to leave with money in their pocket. So I did this for a month, and I did it all at different hours and different days, and actually a little longer than a month, about 6 or 8 weeks I did it. But I did it over two different kind of sessions, if you will. And yeah, what Uber's the only people winning in that, right? I mean, those drivers are getting screwed, and there's just no reason to even do it. I mean, you get done at the end of the week after you've rented a car and you've bought some food and bought gas, and you might have $100, $200 in your bank account, and you've laid out there 50, 60 hours a week to get it. And 50, 60 hours a week when you're driving and you have all that stimulation, all that stress of keeping someone safe all day in your car, and you're in Atlanta watching 6, 7 lanes of traffic. It's stressful. It's a hard gig. And so to end the week with $100 in your pocket obviously sucks, right? Yeah. So I don't know. It was a big mix. And again, we could do a good hour or 2 hours of just stories about this car business. It was incredible. I had great fun. We were making incredible money. I actually tried it again. I went to Miami. I had done some research, and I did about 3 months worth of research, talking to insurance people, all these different people. And they were like, man, you can really make money doing this in Miami. We recommend Fort Lauderdale. We studied the zip codes in Fort Lauderdale, and we narrowed it down to 3 different zip codes that I should park these cars in and do the same thing. And I went back and bought 5 cars. And I went and talked to every police officer in fucking Fort Lauderdale. In Fort Lauderdale, I don't know how much you know about it, but parking's kind of the Wild West. Like, you can basically just park on the side of the road. You can park in people's yards. Like, it's crazy in Fort Lauderdale. And so I learned that by doing this. I went and talked to cops in these zip codes. I went and talked to security people, neighbors. I just want to make sure I can park my cars here, right, in this place. No problem, right? Well, I roll in with a truck, one of those car trucks, this big, huge, long, because I had shipped them into Florida. I found them cheap and shipped them into Florida. And this big truck comes in and unloads my 5 cars that had temp tags on them, right? Unloads my 5 cars, and I parked them all on the side of the road where they told me I could park, by the way. And within 24 hours, some curmudgeon-y old lady had left a tag on my car that says, "These need to get out of here. I'm towing these cars." And I'm like, whatever, she can't tow them. The cops already told me I could keep them there. Well, I go back, like it was like 48 hours later or something. I'm like, oh, you need to go check on these and see if this lady really called. And I get the stickers on all of them from the city, official stickers from the city of Fort Lauderdale. You got to get these cars out of here. And I'm like, man, fuck you guys. I went to all you guys and asked if I could park here, and you said no. So I kept moving them around like musical chairs to 4 different places through Fort Lauderdale over like a month and a half. They didn't rent fast enough for whatever reason in Fort Lauderdale after 3 months of research. They didn't rent fast enough to keep these people off my back, right? And so these people are just waking up in the morning, and all of a sudden there's 5 cars in front of their house, and they're like, who's this asshole parking these random cars in my yard? And so I shut it down. I was like, screw this. And then the guy we bought them from luckily gave us every dime we paid for them, because they didn't rent enough to depreciate the car any. So he gave us every dime we paid for them. And we lost money on the shipping and things like that. But for the most part, we got our money back. And I got out of it. And I just was like, I think the universe is telling me to get out of the car business, right? Yeah.
And so now you're thinking about moving into SaaS, sort of platform.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know if I would consider it SaaS. Where I'm really focused right now is this, trying to build out this property management platform. I have some investors that are interested in putting their stuff on my platform. I have one guy who already committed, and a couple of large investors that I'm talking to this week. One guy I'm hoping to finalize the deal with this week. Another guy. So let's see.
An application, I guess.
Yeah. And in a sense,
Yeah.
let's see where it ends up being in terms of that. But right now, I've just kind of put out a platform. I've built it out, kind of the prototype, and shopping it around to some investors to see what we can come up with in terms of clients. But I'm enjoying this podcast thing, man. I love this. Honestly, I've been wanting a podcast, since I've known you. I mean, for 10 years, I've wanted it, but I didn't really know what I was going to talk about back then. And now I think I've been around enough to where I can really offer people some serious value. And I think the niche we have, we should be able to execute on. So I'm excited about this. And it's fun, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm doing what I do all day anyway, and, having cool conversations every single day. It's awesome. So let me ask one more. What kind of advice would you give your younger self if you had to do it over again?
In life or in travel?
Give me both. Both. Teach me.
I would tell my younger self,
I would never get married.
Well, no. You had sent me that list of questions, and I had said, I don't want to talk about this because I don't want to talk about why I ended up in Europe, because that is a sore point. And then I thought about it, and I thought, actually, there could be something valuable here. I would get married again. I have absolutely only good things to say now,
sure.
A few years down the road from that. But it gave me all of this. It changed my life radically to move overseas. I had lived...
Gave you a hell of a niche, by the way.
Yeah. And I had lived overseas before. I mean, I did some of my university in France. So it wasn't completely sort of out of left field that I would move, but I don't think that I would have had the kick to actually do it, right? And I would do it again, maybe make different decisions. I think that one thing I would tell my younger self, though, is do more things for me and not for other people, not what other people expect that you're going to do, be it in business, be it in life, be it in really any aspect. Maybe it's staying in America. Not everyone was supportive of going overseas, for sure.
For sure.
My family still says, yeah, it would be great if you're back home, right? So I think to decide what I want to do and to do it. And that's what I would recommend to everybody, because I've known you for 20 years, right? More or less. And our lives have changed radically. But they could have probably changed even radically more, because at some point you're in the stream, you get caught up in it. At least for me, I'm doing what I'm doing, and life is just sort of continuing on and can carry you with it, right? And for me, it's led to wonderful things happening career-wise, wonderful friendships, interesting things have happened. But sometimes it's necessary to make your own diversions. So that's what I would say. I would say that I wish that I had done more for me. Part of me says, man, I wish that I'd gone and been a scuba diver instructor in Bali. I mean, a large part of me says that.
I think you could still do
it, right?
With what you do. Why not? Yeah.
But I've also said yes to a lot of things. And I'm really proud of my younger self for saying yes to crazy things, crazy adventures, crazy ideas that have come up. So,
well, I think that your current self should continue saying yes to those crazy things and crazy ideas, and that way, when we get to 80, we don't have any regrets, right? I don't think there's many people that get to that age and don't have regrets. So my goal, and I think yours probably too, is to get to that point and say, man, I did it. And I think you're well on your way. I appreciate you sharing your story. This was incredible, as I knew it would be. But let's keep in touch outside of the podcast.
Yeah, we got to go scuba diving. I'll send you the info. Shark Safari every year, Egypt. Wonderful times. I've had clients that have come with me before. So have a business brainstorming session.
No, let's do it. Absolutely, sounds awesome. Thanks so much. And, let's, if people want to reach out to you, how would they do that? Like business people that would need an international attorney, your LinkedIn maybe, or?
Yeah, my LinkedIn, you can find me Jessica Youngs on LinkedIn, or you can shoot me an email, jessica@octanslegal.com. It's OCTANS legal.com. And I'll be happy to get back to you.
Youngs, Youngs, right?
Yes. S like Sam.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. And we'll be in touch. Thanks again.
Bye.
All right. Have a great day. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Matt Chambers Connects. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes where we'll dive deeper into these two fascinating worlds. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Matt Chambers Connects. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube Music, and many other major podcast platforms so you don't miss a show. Also, please join us on our social media channels so you can connect with other listeners and ask your most pressing questions. And also tell us what types of guests you'd like to see on the show. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.